Hello everyone. So today I am going to review the book of Crisis of Democracy by Adam Przeworski. Adam Przeworski is Polish-American professor of political science in comparative politics. He has many works about modern democratic societies, discussing the nature of political science, social democracy, and political economy. So in following 10-15 minutes, I will try to highlight essential parts from the book and also give some insights about the essentials. Przeworski wrote this book in 2019 and at very critical moments in our contemporary political climate. And large political shifts were occurring around the globe, and especially in the book he mentions these following major events, like rise of Bolsonaro in Brazil and political inequality in Chile, and also intense dictatorship in Chile, and most importantly Trump administration in US. So author wanted his readers to have critical thinking over current socio-economic political climate shifts, and also throughout the book he tries to conceptualize current political occasions with old political outcomes, and he gives certain historical overview starting from fall of Weimar Republic in Germany up to Chile's dictatorship. So he actually at the end gives certain I wouldn't say predictions, but try to draw a picture of how future democratic system would look like if we take lessons from past events and current situation. The book is divided into three major parts. So in the first part, he defines crisis and democracy. So Przeworski writes, democracy is a political arrangement in which people select governments through elections and have a reasonable possibility of removing non-working governments that they don't like. So he basically states that democracy is a mechanism for processing conflicts. Political institutions, social communities, and also political institutions manage conflicts in an orderly way in order not to threat public order and regulate the social communities in a way that democratic rules are ensured. So the question is arising here. Democracy is based on if the democracy, and the Przeworski actually says democracy based on fair elections through the votes of civilians and actually majority will. So what happens if enough people agree on having authoritarian regime? So this is the main concern raised by Przeworski, and this is a hole in democracy that Przeworski highlights. And he says Hitler got his power through this hole. The founding authors, the founding fathers, call it tyranny of majority. And constitutional writers actually design certain tools or certain means to certainly decrease the effects of tyranny of majority. And this is called checks and balances, separation of powers, rule of law, civil movements, civil human rights movements, or federalism or individual rights that try to help minority to prevent falling into this hole. And Przeworski defines the word crisis. So the word crisis is a Greek word that means decision. And this book actually defines crisis in this way. So crisis is something that helps people to make a decision. So it helps people to see the gaps in democratic system, in democratic societies. And crisis helps to see where is the problem arises and where the solution should address to. So crisis can be actually converted into or turned into advantage, as the book explains. Crisis in democracy occur when the existing order or mechanism or methodology doesn't work any longer. And in this book, Przeworski gives a few major examples of democracies that have been in crisis, and certain nations actually tried and could manage recover from crisis and also avoided major catastrophes, but the others were not so lucky. So this was here the major thing, important thing to remember is that all these historical discussions of political crisis is important to see how everything can went wrong. For example, Przeworski gives example, especially highlights that not the conditions itself, but the people and actions of people is really important in this station, in this time of crisis. For example, he gives an example of France crisis. France crisis from 1954 to 1968 was brought on by the Algerian War or Algerian events, as it was referred to in France. So de Gaulle was elected in 1858, and he wanted to maintain Algeria as a colony of France. So de Gaulle restricted press, and the war created protests and conflicts on the streets. However, Przeworski suggests that it was de Gaulle's personality that prevented him from becoming a dictator, because he stated, "Would one believe that at the age of 67 I begin a career of a dictator?" So in the end, French government was able to come together and act decisively in the face of disaster, and which resulted in Fifth French Republic born. So the first part of book actually analyzes four historic cases in which democracy faced an existential crisis. And Przeworski says democracy easily die in the countries where these three major case is observed. The first is practice of democracy is uneasy. The second is that democratic institutions are not conducive to majority rule. The third one is majority pure economic conditions. For instance, low level of economic development, high level of inequality was observed. However, that's also essential to mention that even though certain conditions may increase or decrease democratic consolidation, at the end actions of people are decisive. So coming to the main point, people are decisive, people should be decisive, and the actions of not only nation but also political figures, leaders can make a change. So as Przeworski mentions, looking to past or future, we can use history to just simply see signs of democratic erosions, and also never can predict outcomes based on these historical cases. So we can never predict future based on past, but we can see how what are the signs of democratic erosions, and how and what are the causes that we can focus on. In the second part, he explores signs of democratic crisis. And there is three major signs. The first is erosion of traditional political party systems, rise of radical right parties, and decline of support for democracy by public. So he continues with potential causes of this science, and mainly focuses on economic factors and social divisions. So that's very obvious by Przeworski that That's very certainly obviously stated by Przeworski, that if somewhere, let's say 10k GDP per capita income range is observed, so society became more democratic and remain more democratic for longer term. According to Przeworski, democracies with stable and strong economies are less likely to have crises, and if they do have crisis, they are more likely to recover easily and quickly. But however, inequality and power corruptions mixed with weak economies are good food or good recipe for crisis. In the last part of the book, Przeworski looks into future, and the question arises: can democracy backslide even in developed long-term democracies, and how possible? He says that democracy works best when there is something at stake in an election, but not too much. For example, deep societal or political divisions are dangerous. Radical political parties or populist right-wing elections or propagandas, or traditional parties staying too much in the power, in the position, or old school, as I said, like populist right-wing movements are too high, and it's backsliding factors that brings to democratic crisis. And the democratic crisis doesn't happen overnight. Look at corruption in elections. Look at muted voices of free media or intensely controlled media. Or look at fake news, propagandas, economic degradation, manipulation. All these factors brings to crisis. And it's not just something that's driven from elections or driving from, let's say, dictators or something like that. At the end, Crisis of Democracy is as a book is an essential reading material for one who wants to learn more about state of affairs in consolidated democracies. Books drives attention to many interesting questions, giving example of past and present, and that the book itself well explains how a democracy is not just votes or elections, but political nature, political and social institutions and interactions, interaction means between them. Media, economy, all are interconnected, intercorrelated with one another. Thanks for attention and have a nice winter break.